I watched, oh gosh, for the first time in maybe as much as 20. No, it's probably been about 15 years. No, 18. I probably closer to 18. The Donner cut of Superman 2 is largely my preferred cut of that movie now. I dislike the ending, and sometimes I think I would skip over. I would pull out that disc of the Donner cut because it's basically him just going around the world, turning back time again. And so it's like, no, we've already seen that, and it feels a little like, I don't know, a little bit all too easy to wrap things up in a nice tight bow by turning back time, especially when you've already seen him do it once. Originally, though, that was going to be like a two-part film or a single film or something like that. He wasn't going to use the turn back time ending twice. But anyway, yeah, that's kind of the substitute in the Donner cut for the magic kiss that Superman uses to make Lois forget his identity and stuff. And I do prefer, I think, the magic kiss ending to accomplish the same ends instead of turning back time. But pretty much everything else about the Donner cut is preferred by me to the theatrical cut. Despite that, I did not watch the Donner cut this time around. I watched the theatrical cut because this was the first time that I would ever have seen it, not only on Blu-ray, but I mean, like, the first time I'd really watched it for a long, long time. And so, yeah, I think that Richard Lester, who took over directing chores, used a lot of Donner's footage, but still had to reshoot a lot of stuff in order to get credit as the director, which the producers wanted. They wanted to just leave Donner's name off of the project. And so as Richard Lester reshot a number of scenes from this movie, they gained a lightness and a comedic sensibility to them that I just don't like as much. For example, let's see here. In the theatrical cut, I'm trying to remember if this is kept in the Donner cut as well. In any case, Clark is walking across the street at one point, and he gets distracted. Lois is talking to him or something from across, calling to him from across the street, and a taxi cab hits him. And Lois doesn't see the impact. She just sees that he's out in the street in the middle of traffic and stuff. And he continues walking across. The taxi cab driver gets out and he looks at the front of his taxi cab, which is completely caved in because, of course, it ran into Superman disguised as Clark Kent. Now, that creates I guess a quote unquote comedic moment, but much like a number of comedic moments in Marvel movies in recent years, I'm like, it's a cheap gag because if you really think about it for a moment, it totally breaks down my ability to accept the faux realism of the rest of the movie. Would Superman really be that distracted by Lois Lane and his Clark Kent identity that he would allow a car to hit him and the car to take that kind of damage, to do that kind of damage to this taxi driver and his ability to make a living? I mean, like, there's just a lot of things that it's a very short-sighted gag. And I think that there's a lot of that kind of stuff in the humor that Lester brought into the Superman movies, both in 2 and then when he came back and directed Superman 3. And so I really prefer it without those kinds of moments. Again, it's possible that was in the Donner cut and I just forgot, but those kinds of moments are much more common in Lester's cut. I was reminded of the word verisimilitude. I might be mispronouncing that a little bit, but Richard Donner talked about in the making of Superman that this word really captured what he wanted to achieve with his version of Superman. I've referred to this idea as faux psychological realism, but I might switch over to verisimilitude going forward because I think it, in fewer syllables captures the same idea. And that is that you want to have this sense of believability. It's not about making the entire thing completely believable and realistic, because we're talking about a space alien that happens to look like a human who's wearing this costume and doing good around the world, So it's like, okay, at some point you're going to disbelieve, but within that concept, trying to make as many other elements as believable, as relatable to our human experience as possible, is going to help ground the movie and help audiences invest in the drama, the stakes, the tension of the moment-to-moment story. And so I was really reminded in the final scene between Clark and Lois of the verisimilitude that Donner was going for. After she has learned Superman's identity, the day has been saved, but she's still living in the aftermath of knowing his identity, him having his powers back, which prevents him from really having an intimate romantic relationship. In other words, able to have sex, presumably safely, with a human. I mean, you kind of have to read between the lines to assume that that's, why his powers were taken away. But when he went to the Fortress of Solitude and he explained to his AI, the AI version of his mother, that I love Lois, I want to be with her, then she says basically, in order for that to happen, you need to live as a mortal. You need to have your powers stripped away and forever be immortal. And so, since he had to get his powers back to stop Zod, and he can't just keep bouncing back and forth, it's like, okay, now he is definitely Superman. It means that their relationship cannot be, that it cannot really be culminated, in the way that normal human romantic relationships are. And so she is just left with having to live knowing who he is, but not being able to really pursue a meaningful, fully fulfilled romantic relationship with him. And the tears that Margot Kidder gives in that performance really endeared her to me in a way that I didn't expect, because historically I have appreciated Margot Kidder's Lois Lane as the go-getter, no-nonsense reporter, but in terms of the other elements of her likability and her appeal for Superman as a romantic interest, I just didn't see it, But maybe as I've gotten older and I'm maybe willing to admit, well, she just wasn't sexually appealing to me as a young single guy watching these movies. Maybe that's what that was about. I don't know. I wouldn't put it past myself for that to be the real core issue. But either way, my sensibilities for what I like in movies has changed enough that I look at this now and I'm seeing parts of her investment in the reality of what Lois would be feeling in this, and just the tragic nature of this doomed couple that can't be together. Really seeing that play out in Margot Kidder's performance really was something, and it really made me well up with tears. Not that were like flowing down my face, but like I was getting blurry vision watching this scene, But I thought that there was still something kind of beautiful about it, about how, in particular, even if Lois wasn't quite able to move forward from here, Superman was willing to. It was hard for him, you could tell, and he cared for Lois and he had compassion for her, but you could tell that it wasn't hitting him as hard as it was Lois. And he had what came across to me as a degree of contentment to sacrifice that part of his life in service to humanity as a whole. And so I think that in this kind of ending of the movie, I mean, ultimately he helps Lois out by just helping her forget, but he still remembers. And yet he's able to move forward as a fully fulfilled person, knowing that he can't have that kind of relationship. And that would just not be a thing today, or it would be so much more rare, because in the decades since this movie came out, we have elevated sex to the point of it defining human existence, and human existence not being in our fictions fulfilled until people get coupled up. And so I think that has led to all kinds of problems and fed into the idea of our core identity being based in some way on our sexuality, on gender, things like that, instead of the more core issues of what it is that makes us human. First and foremost, being image bearers of God, So I saw at the end of Superman 2 kind of this unintended, I think, but still, vision of a fulfilled human being that is not fulfilled based on achieving some kind of romantic status, but instead actually denying himself that romantic fulfillment in life in the service of something that was more important, in the service of a virtue that rightly took priority over his fulfillment romantically in life. And I think that there is something beautiful in that, even though I really don't think that was an intended message or theme at all. I think that it is a situation in a story in Hollywood that would be so less common today and is more valuable as a result to see it in Superman 2. Let's see. Yeah, I don't think I have much more to say about Superman 2. I mean, I think that some of the optical effects certainly don't age very well. I think some of the wire flying is, pretty good. But again, you got to fuzz out those wires on your display in order to really appreciate it to the utmost. But yeah, I thought Superman 2 was fine. I've never been a huge fan of Superman 2, but yeah, it was all right.